Welcome back to the Capes and Tights podcast right here on capesandtights.com. I'm your host, Justin Soderberg. This episode is brought to you again by Galactic Comics and Collectibles in Bangor, Maine. You can check them out at galacticcomicsandcollectibles.com. This is Daniel Kraus back again on the podcast to discuss another book here. Last time he was on, he discussed his book Whalefall, which hits stores near you in paperback on September 10th. The hardcover is available now, but he's here to talk Pay the Piper, a book that he co-authored with legendary filmmaker George A. Romero. We talked about that, some other things, and some cool news on here about another collaboration, and so on and so forth. So check out Daniel Kraus, New York Times bestselling author of books like Whalefall, Rotters, Scowler, The Shape of Water, Trollhunters, The Living Dead, Whalefall. I already said that, but now Pay the Piper. Enjoy this episode, but before you do, check us out on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Blue Sky, Threads, all those things and so much more, as well as rate, review, subscribe, all that stuff over on Spotify, Apple, and wherever you find your podcasts. You can find out way more information about books, comics, news, movies, all that stuff over on capesandtights.com. This is Daniel Kraus, New York Times bestselling author of Pay the Piper with George A. Romero. Enjoy, everyone. Welcome back to the podcast, Daniel. How are you today?
I'm doing great because I'm here again with you.
Exactly, right? You're ramping right up now. I mean, you're ramping right up. You've been busy, obviously, all summer, but like you're getting right into the thick of things here again. I mean, the last time we actually talked either via video or phone or anything like that, other than a quick couple text messages, was when you were doing this for Whalefall last year. So, I mean, how was your time off, quote unquote?
Well, my time off was great because I was writing, which is what I really love to do. It sort of feels like I'm settling into a rhythm now that basically August and September and October, and you could go one way, north or south of that, but those are sort of the months when I'm promoting stuff. I'm kind of more or less in a pattern of fall releases for the most part. But that's not too bad. That's like, that's like 9 months at home and then 3 months that are in some mix of being out and about or just doing interviews and stuff. So, but it's, I'm getting used to it. It's not as hard as it was.
It seems like it probably a little bit easier. And is this press like trips and things like this a little bit less than Whalefall? I mean, I'm guessing you're doing some, but it doesn't seem as busy.
No, Whalefall was I think possibly a one-of-a-kind situation where there was just tons and tons of demand. But I do have some stuff in the future that I do wonder if it will result in a lot of events. So we can talk about that. Some of that we'll have to talk about off the air, but we can talk about it.
So and speaking of Whalefall really quickly, I think it's one of those things with your new book coming out, Pay the Piper. I think that a little bit is the paperback's coming out here pretty soon too, right?
Yeah, the paperback comes out 1 week after Pay the Piper. So whatever that is, September 10th maybe. So the paperback will be brand new in September.
So that's pretty exciting. I mean, I get another whole push on that. People who wait for the paperback because maybe they like to save a few dollars or just like reading them in paperback. So that's pretty cool.
It's nice because it'll pop up on shelves again. And through various weirdness, it was never in airports, which always annoyed me. So the paperback will be finally in airports, so flying customers can read it.
It's better to be reading a book about being swallowed by a whale on a flight than it would be on a boat. So there's that.
Unless your plane crashes into the ocean.
That's you know what I mean. If that's how you're gonna go out.
Worst case scenario. If
you could survive a plane crash and survive being eaten by a whale, that's a story, man. Like, I don't know. Like, that's a pretty good tale. So maybe that's worth it. Or if you don't survive the whale, that's a way to go, right? I mean, it's, So Justin was flying across the ocean, his plane crashed, and he was eaten by a whale. Okay, cool.
Yeah, that's some real bad luck.
But yeah, what we're here, I mean, we're talking about Pay the Piper. Obviously, you've talked a lot. Some of the similar questions are going to be asked to you over the next few weeks and with recent interviews that you probably were asked during the Living Dead promotion of that release, because it's like working with George A. Romero and so on and so forth. It's slightly different, obviously, because you found this manuscript, a partially finished manuscript in a collection. You've told the story over and over again, but like, how did this, you know, finishing this novel come to be, from George A.
Sure.
Romero?
I was in the final stages, I believe, of finishing up The Living Dead, and was going through the Romero archives, which were brand new at the time. They were still being cataloged by the librarians at the University of Pittsburgh. Uh, and I found in the last box that I looked through, I found a couple of manila envelopes, and they had the first half of a novel that really seems to be as close as a secret project as he could have had. Like
Mhm.
pretty much no one had ever heard of it before. But you could tell just from reading his pages how excited he was about it. Like the Living Dead pages were good, but this was a different level. Like his excitement was just bouncing off the page, and I'm convinced that's because it had nothing to do with zombies, and he was very exhausted by zombies. He felt he had, like he really did personally want to make a zombie movie every decade. Like that really was something that he wanted to do, and the world didn't make him do it. But at the end, he was very cornered by zombies. And so this book, Pay the Piper, it's it's got all the Romero kind of quirks and trademarks that I love, but is in service of something completely different. It's really all the stuff he honestly loved. Like, and the stuff that he liked to watch, the movies he loved, really in a lot of ways reflect someone who was a kid in the 50s. Like he liked westerns, and he liked pirates and adventures and jungle and gold, and just all these sort of things that you think about you'd see like Tarzan books or something,
Mhm.
like all these kind of adventure-y uh, novels for boys that they published in the 50s and the 40s. And this book is just rife with them, but sort of put under a modern lens, and still is a great creature feature too. But as with all Romero things, there's a lot else going on.
Mhm.
It's the creature the part of it is just one element. But anyway, to answer your question, yeah, I found those pages. There were a lot of them. Unlike The Living Dead, they just cut off. The Living Dead was like he had written a bunch of stuff that was located all over the book, and he had some notes on where some of the plot threads were going. With this one, there was nothing. It was like he wrote what looked like half of a book, stopped like mid chapter, and that was it. And so it was a really quite a different kind of challenge
Mhm.
to figure out from what was there, where he might have been going.
Did you, I mean, is this one of those things that like you had not carte blanche, but like the estate, George A. Romero's estate and his people, were you just like able to do what you wanted with the base story, or was this something that you had a little bit more like, or did you feel like you wanted to pay, a little bit closer to the actual original story?
Well, it's always both,
Yeah.
like as with Living Dead, I'm very aware and appreciative of that there's a finite number of pages here that Romero wrote. And so I want to preserve as many of those as possible. And so there was a little bit of what I did with Living Dead, which was this chapter doesn't work where George puts it. Can I make it work somewhere else? Can I combine two characters so I can save this chapter that doesn't seem to go anywhere? And so forth. Ways to conserve what we have from him. And I did that with this book too. But yeah, I wouldn't say carte blanche, but like I have a lot of, I think with Living Dead, I earned from the Romero estate a lot of, a good length of leash, where I could do what I thought was right. And, always giving them the right to veto anything. They never did on either book. Um, but I would have, of course, been happy to hear them out if they had any issues, which they did not. Uh, but yeah, they know I take this more seriously than almost anyone on the planet would take. I go through these manuscripts with a fine tooth comb
Mhm.
and treat them like I always say it's like I'm repairing the Sistine Chapel. Like I go about the job very carefully.
Well, I also think it's slightly different than I say most people don't finish other people's novels in a sense that aren't, knowledgeable about the person. But you've been a George A. Romero fan basically your entire life. And so it's obviously you want to also protect his legacy in the sense that
Mhm.
it might have been difficult to, I'm guessing, that there's moments where you're like, I'm going to cut that or move that, but I also don't want to screw with it because I do respect this person and I've always have. But yeah, so you've been a Romero fan for a long time, so that also goes into it, I'm guessing, as well.
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of Romero fans, and I count myself among them. I think in my adult years, I became more of a student, sort of,
Mhm.
really studying and digging into the kind of person he was and the worldview he has. And certainly when I approached The Living Dead, I really got into that stuff. Like I really tried to learn how his brain works, um, what sort of things inspired him, what he took out of the art that inspired him, and tried to apply that to myself. And I think after a time, there is a third character who's arisen. There's sort of George and there's Daniel, and then there's the George Daniel hybrid that is kind of the author of these books, where I've
Mhm.
sort of blended our styles together into a third voice. Um, but yeah, it was it was hard in The Living Dead, and it was harder here. This was pound for pound. Like this isn't a very long book,
Yeah.
but I think page by page, it was one of the absolute hardest things that I've had to do.
I can imagine. I mean, there is this, you mentioned the two people in the third, like, amalgamation of the two of you. I do feel like that when I read this book, not in a bad way, but it felt like it was written by two people, but not in a, like, I felt like some people might say that's a bad thing, but there's certain things in here where I felt like I felt heard your voice from reading your novels and then hearing George's voice from maybe reading watching his not watching his movies and then and reading your Living Dead collaboration. I just there was one of those things where I felt like there was moments where I'm like, I don't want to guess and I never want to know which lines you physically wrote and potentially that he wrote, but I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, ah, it feels like something Daniel would say. And then it would be like, oh, that seems like a George A. Romero thing, but not in a bad way. I feel like
Yeah.
I hate saying that because I think some people take that wrong. I think some people like can see like when chapters, are specifically written by another person. If you alternate chapters on something or so on and so forth. I meant in a really good way that just felt like you paid respect to what George's voice is like, and you also still had your voice. Any fan of Daniel Kraus's writing should like this book. It's not like if you don't like Daniel's writing, then you might not like it either. I don't know. It's hard to say.
Well, it reminds me of when I was a kid. I remember reading an interview um, with Stephen King and Peter Straub, and they just put out The Talisman. And I remember they were saying how as they wrote, they would try to write like each other. And so a
Mhm.
lot of the lines that people assumed were Stephen King lines were Straub lines, and vice versa. So I'm sure there's some of that in Pay the Piper
Yeah.
too, where I'm trying to sort of be the Romero element of it as much as I can.
Again, you've watched all of his stuff, you've read some of his things, you've seen his archives, so on and so forth. So it's probably you're a student. You've learned these things to be able to speak and write and have influence on his stuff. So it makes sense that you would make it so that it's smoother in that. But like I said, I don't know what it was. It was like I could definitely be like if you just had your name on it, I'd be like, oh, this is a Daniel book. I can understand
Mm-hmm,
that.
mm-hmm.
And if it just had George's name on it, I'd be like, oh, it's just a George's book. So like I can see both sides of it. I think it was well written. It was beautifully written and people say that George is the godfather of zombies and things like that. He's really a godfather of horror in general. Like I think that's what I see in this book is that you mentioned you put a little video out on your newsletter for anybody who doesn't sign up for your newsletter via email. You should because it's wonderful. First of all, also has one of the greatest names for a newsletter ever. Right? I mean, Last Kraus on the left is absolutely wonderful. But you put a video in there, and I watched the video last week, and you talk about how um, it's a horror book, but that it has influences on other things and so on and so forth. And I don't know where I was going on this now because I got on a tangent with the whole Last
Sure,
Kraus on the
sure.
left thing. But yeah, it's a different book for George A. Romero to write, but it still fits in his wheelhouse of horror. So I guess that's what I'm
Yeah,
trying to say.
yeah. I guess that you know, if there's one thing about this book that really couldn't have come from me, it's really the entire setup of it.
Mhm.
Like one thing I wouldn't have done is decided to write a book in the Louisiana Bayou starring a sheriff who's obsessed with John Wayne
Yeah.
and this little girl named Pontiac. I mean, it's just such a bizarre cast of characters, uh, and that's what was so fun about discovering it and um, was part of the challenge too. Was like, wow, this is way out of my wheelhouse. When I was working on Living Dead, it was like, well, I've grown up with the zombie
Yes.
his zombie movies. I kind of know this world. This other world I didn't know at all. So it was, I had to research the Battle of New Orleans and the Pirates Lafitte and John Wayne, um, just all sorts of bizarre things that somehow all had to be tied together.
Yeah, I mean, you can feel like when you're reading this that you're in Louisiana Bayou. Like you feel like almost like I feel like I'm sweating when I'm reading it, in the descriptive words and things like that. But also the Cajun dialect, but it's like it's not overwhelming. I think that some people, if you hear that terminology, like, oh, it's a Cajun dialect, that they might actually be like, oh, I don't know if I'm going to be able to read that and understand
Sure.
that. But I do think that it's like the right amount, if that makes any sense. That it's like it's
Yeah.
there to feel authentic, but not to the point where it's overwhelming. And I think that there's sometimes when I watch books that are based, years and years and years and years ago, and it's all or in South America, and it's all in English, and you're like, well, that's not really what happened because it probably wasn't English that they were speaking at that time. And the same thing, if you're in Louisiana, likely this is going to be mostly Cajun dialect and Southern accents, where you were able to balance that pretty well in this book.
Yeah, and there were lots of variations within that too. Like I had to kind of keep a record of which of the characters were Cajun, which of them were just sort of Louisiana Southern. There were degrees of how Cajun or how Southern they were, like which ones drop their G's on their sentences, which ones don't. So there was a lot of, tracking the various dialects carefully between each of the characters. But yeah, I took a cue. There's a little disclaimer at the front of the book where
Yeah.
I I I borrow kind of how I approach the Cajun dialect from this great book called Bayou Farewell by Mike Tidwell. It's a nonfiction book, but he in that book tried to do the same thing, which was convey the basic sounds of Cajun English and Cajun French without being overwhelming and
Mhm.
without making it just sort of incomprehensible to read.
Yeah, because I feel like you could get overwhelmed. I think there's one of those trying to make it authentic as possible, and then also thinking that like the majority of the people who are going to read this are not going to be as authentic as possible. So some of us might be like, it's a turn off of the book if the whole book. Well, I know that's the same thing with The Devil That Takes Me Home. Is it with a Gambino?
Mm-hmm.
There's parts of that are just written in Spanish, and it's like there's a translator guide that goes with it to help you with it, but like. But it's a mixture. It's so perfectly put in there. And I
Yeah,
think it's the same thing. I think with this, it was just like it's there to make it feel authentic, but that not there to be overwhelming to the point where you're like, I can't read this book.
yeah,
I need a little book to translate it at the end.
and I do that all the time. I mean, that's a very
Yes.
distinct method. Like I'm writing this World War I book right now, and that takes place in France, and so there would sometimes just be French,
Yeah.
and I don't translate it, and it's okay, Or in some other books where I'm just talking a lot of jargon, where maybe like the aircraft carrier section of The Living Dead, where there's a lot of technical stuff that I don't really expect people to understand or follow. It's part of the texture. You just kind of go with it, and part of it is so that the reader feels comfortable knowing that the author knows what they're talking about.
Mhm.
So they know the author gets it. We're in good hands, and let's continue.
It's the we've talked about this before, and we talked about the difference in books. You just mentioned your World War I book, you're writing, and then Whale Fall and all the other books that you have out there, and that this book is horror, which is some of you've written horror before. This is not the first time you dabbled in horror, but you like to change it up. Like you like to, Whale Fall was more a thriller, but also like your sci-fi or your not sci-fi, but like your would you consider it sci-fi? I mean, I don't know. It's
I
hard to say
I
because
I don't consider it sci-fi, but it is. If you look in the cataloging at the front of the book, it
yeah,
is technically
it's science and it's
specified
fiction.
as
So yeah,
sci-fi. It is fiction with science, certainly, but
yeah, yeah,
it's not what we would commonly think as
yeah.
sci-fi.
Sci. There you go. Fiction
I
science.
agree. It's sci-fi.
But no, but you have this, you dabble in different genres and it keeps you fresh. It keeps you, and I'd say that I'm speaking for you on this, but like it's different. And I like that about that. And I think that one of the things I get with your originality on these books. Again, this is not your original idea. This is George's original idea, but like you still feel like your originality, and I think you get that in all your books. And I think that's what makes Pay the Piper stand out as well. And I think that's, I think you can do that as an author. I feel like if you were an artist, like a musician, people might get upset with you. I guess Post Malone's been doing that recently, right? I mean, he's been dabbling in a bunch of different genres. He's got a country album that
It's
just came out. So I don't want to call you the Post Malone of
you
novels, but
be the first one. I love it. No, it's not easy to do
yeah,
as a writer. Like I, Romero was very, very trapped. Like his archive is just
yeah.
filled with things that aren't horror, and he never got to make any of them. And I think I have, through part cunning and part luck, been able to do it. And I've been kind of all over the place with my genres, but it's really, really hard to do. I know great writers who have just been turned down flat at the even supposition that they may try to go outside what they normally write. It is really tough to do. But for me, even if you just look at my horror stuff, one thing you won't see is like, oh, here's Kraus's vampire novel, here's his
Yeah.
werewolf. With the exception of zombies, which of course what came straight from Romero, so that's a
Mhm.
big exception. I'm not really interested in like giving my take on sort of established icons. Although you could make a huge argument that Shape of Water was just that. Uh, but Pit the Piper then really spoke to me because it's an entirely original monster, an entirely original idea. There's just been nothing else like it.
Mhm. I agree, but I also think that Whalefall was similar to that too. I think it's one of those things that, and I'll go back to Rotters and things
Mhm.
like that. Were like, I mean, let's be honest, the whole premise of Rotters is pretty could
Yeah,
turn some people off from even wanting to pick it up. Like, if it wasn't for you visiting here and meeting my family and my wife and me being a fan of yours and reading your books, I don't know if she would have ever read Rotters. She read
sure.
it, she loved it. So it's like it's one of those, you have to kind of be a fan of yours. And I think I didn't read it when you first released it.
Yeah.
But I obviously read it after I started reading your books. I'm like, oh, I'll go back and read Rotters. That makes sense. And now it's one of my favorites. And so
Hmm.
you have this ability to write these different novels. And I get you're right. You're lucky enough to do that. Like there are definitely people who do it, and George was one of them. Maybe George would have done it if he had a different name. It's pen name for doing a book. Maybe he would have been able to release more books. But like the name George A. Romero is what a lot of authors sorry, publishers and media companies want on their things if they're going to put out something.
Well, he had a couple chances in his career. Like after Dawn of the
Yeah.
Dead came out, it was such a huge hit. He used that to make Night Riders, which is
Mm.
his one of his strangest, most esoteric films. Like that's what he
Yeah.
wanted to put all the capital that he had gained. He spent it on that. And he did that a few different times in his career. The problem was they never made money.
Yeah.
And then once you got to the last leg of his career, you know, he couldn't get money for anything that wasn't zombies, much less
Mm.
horror.
Uh,
And as a student of his, I'm very aware of that, and I don't want that to be where I've ended up.
mm.
So I've been very careful ever since around like Blood Sugar and then
Mm.
Shape of Water and Teddy Saga, like trying to thread outward. So I've got multiple things going on, and often that I think you do pay a price with financially or with readership in the short run, but I
Mm.
think in the long run it's good. In the long run, diversity is really, really good for your career. In the short run, it's difficult, and then every once in a while you do something completely different, and it like Wellfall, and it's a home
Yeah.
run. You know,
Yeah. And I mean, obviously, you hoped that it would have been with Whale Fall. Like, you obviously don't write a book now without the like. Oh, hopefully, this is going to be a flop, and I can just like hide and no one can see me. You want it to be a success, but I'm guessing it was a success that you saw hopeful, but like it was a pretty big success. We'll see that. I had definitely had people speaking the name Whalefall outside of my inner circle more than I expected to hear. Meaning that like there was definitely some people out there reading the book that I was like, oh, that's pretty cool seeing that person post about it or so on and so forth, which was pretty awesome. And so yeah, you also have to release more books more often, I would think, right? If you were someone who
yeah.
released a book every 5 years, it's a little harder to diversify your genre because of the fact that they're expecting the next thing. You have been coming out with Whale Fall, that these books are coming out every year or so.
Right.
It's a little bit easier to keep your feed off of the
Yeah.
last one, even if it isn't the same genre.
That's a great point. I mean,
Yeah.
if you're putting a book out every, let's say, 3 or 4 years or something, the the risk factor is a lot higher. Like if you're a horror author, let's say, who puts out a book every 3 or 4 years, and your next book is a Western romance, like if it flops, and there's a good chance it will, that's 8 years between books that you could maybe make some money
Mhm.
off of or whatever. But if you're like me and you're really productive and you're regularly putting out at least a couple books a year, it lowers the impact, lowers the downside. I can have a book flop financially and it not ruin me because
Yeah.
I've got so many other projects going.
Yes. You can hopefully pick up with the next one, and the next one hopefully
Totally.
yeah. And here's the deal. Say this is going to be amazing. I do think that anybody who bought The Living Dead is likely going to buy this one. Let's be honest, because the partnership, if they like that book, they're going to like this one in the sense that it's the partnership between the two of you. Again, it is a different book. It's a different, it's not zombies, or it's a creature feature, but it's not zombies per se, and so on. And so there's that. But then there's gonna be the additional people who maybe saw Red Whale Fall, who were like, "Oh, I'll take a
Right,
chance on
right.
this." Yeah, and so you have that ability to do that. And if it didn't work, your Whale Fall paperback release comes out right now, so you can hopefully piggyback on that until you get to the next book you come out with.
It
Not
is
that I want
really
it to fail, but
it's really interesting because all the readers who sort of showed up for Whalefall who had never read me before,
Mhm.
um, I really expected them all to really love this book I've come down next year called Angel Down. Like
Mhm.
it seems built for that readership. But I've been kind of warmly surprised by the people I've seen so far who have read Pay the Piper, who only know me from Whalefall. And Pay the Piper is a much more it's clearly a horror novel. It's not kind of a
Yeah.
more populist sort of genre bender like Whalefall. And they've largely, from what I've seen, have really liked Pay the Piper. So
Mhm.
uh, I'm that's what I want for all readers. That's the kind of reader I am. Is that genre is almost has no bearing on what I choose to read. I just want really good writing.
Mhm.
I just want to be surprised at sort of a story level, or more than that, at a page level, at a sentence
Mhm.
level. It's writing that I'm interested in, really.
Yeah, and I'm similar on that sense too. If you can give me a well-written, unique story, I'm gonna go into that thing. I mean, I'm reading Chuck Wendig's monster movie right now,
Mhm.
which is a middle grade horror book, and it's just I fan of Chuck, so I'm gonna try to do this, and I feel like it's like Chuck working on his R.L. Stein impression in a sense, not in a way that it's the same or a ripoff. It's his version of this book, and I'm reading it and I'm going, it definitely seems like Chuck's read some R.L. Stein, but also
Sure.
has his own flair on it. And I think that I'm in for a well written, unique story, and that's where we're getting. And so, it's same thing with this Angel Down coming, Pay the Piper, Whalefall. They're all unique stories in the sense that people are going to want to pick those up for that. But you've also gained a following. And I do think that, if I would have paid attention to your social media following, it probably has grown since the beginning of Whalefall release.
Probably, but then again, that kind of coincided with the disintegration of Twitter. So
So,
who
yeah.
knows?
Who knows exactly? Yeah, right. I mean, my wife has posted a picture of our daughter's 5 month birth. The picture you do every month, and she's like, "Wow, we got like 6 different bots that have like OnlyFans following us now and like liking us." I'm like, "Yeah, I don't know what's going on.
Yeah.
I don't know what." It seems like a very odd picture for someone from OnlyFans to like. I'll tell you that
Well,
much. But
yeah, totally. Yeah, and that's why I'm glad you mentioned the newsletter. Is that
yeah,
like all? I mean, social media is just really, really falling apart.
but it's like, how do
And
you know? I mean, you have a publisher that's behind you on these books, so they're hopefully helping to try to push these books for you to help sell the books and so on and so forth. Publishers, your publicists, your people are all helping to help you. But like, there's people out there who are creators that don't have as much of a bigger publisher or trying to do this on their own, and they really like,
Mhm.
well, how do I get this out there? Because even your
Yeah,
your even your email list has to be coming from somewhere, so you have to tell someone to then sign up for it. So you have this avenue. If people know your
sure,
website, or if they
right.
Google your website or whatever. But like, there's a lot of people out there being like, I don't know what to do if social media is
I know.
imploding. Like, it's the where I was telling people on Twitter to follow my stuff and to buy my stuff. Now I can't because half
Yeah,
the people are leaving, and I just it's hard.
yeah. In the old days, you would show up to, I guess, like literary conferences
Mhm.
with a clipboard with a sign up sheet. Like that's almost where we're back to again. I mean, I was never there. I missed that
Yeah,
phase,
yeah.
but that doesn't sound very
No, we did that
cost
for
effective either.
the podcast and for our website. It'd be like, oh, it'd be a nice avenue to get to people as an email list. And but the only way to get people to sign up for it too was to give away something. And so I was like finding things, and it was like, oh, a signed copy of this. I'll put this in there. Put your name on a list. Put it in there. We'll draw it. Like if I just said,
Right,
here, sign up for my mailing list, I would have had 3 people on it. But if I
right.
said, hey, I'm going to potentially give you something, then I got like 30 people. And then I have to go through and put all that in. So it's like it's a lot of work, and it's just it's and you have to put the thing together. I'm guessing. I'm guessing you sit at this desk that you're at right now and put
Right.
that email together, which, like I said, I always enjoy because it's you don't take yourself too seriously. You promote your stuff. We tell a few jokes in there, and so on and so forth. You're pretty good at it, I'll say. But also the name, like you got lucky with that name. Yeah, it's a pretty good name. You are a writer, so obviously that makes sense. But
Well, yeah, I mean, there's a few words that rhyme with Kraus, so it
yeah,
just seemed natural.
exactly. It's so with Whale Fall, you came up with this unique story, this unique book that came out that got adapting. It's being adapted into a feature film, which is pretty awesome. You came off, obviously The Living Dead, with George A. Romero. You're now back into it. You say this is the last collaboration between you and George A. Romero. Is that because there's none left, or are you just done with? You
I
sure there
well,
isn't anything left? Or
I am. It's because there's none left. I think.
okay,
As far as the archive as it exists now, there's no other
okay,
novels. There is a start of what looks like a novel, but we're talking like it's 12 pages or something.
yeah,
It's
yeah.
like there's nothing really. There's
It'd have to
there's
be
nothing
like
else.
Daniel Kraus's so and so based on the idea by George A.
Yeah,
Romero.
yeah, right. So as far as things that were intended to be novels, no, there's nothing
Okay.
else.
Yeah. It, you went through these things. Do you think that you now are such a student of George A. Romero that you could potentially even contemplate the idea of writing some sort of book about George A.
Funny you should say that. We're gonna have to talk offline.
Romero?
But yes, I think I probably could.
And that's like I said. I don't know. I guess you're a fan of him and so on and so forth. It just makes sense to I don't know. It's not always in that either. I mean, you've just because someone likes someone doesn't mean that you can also tell a story about someone either. But yeah,
Sure,
but
sure.
with Whalefall, you came and visited us here in Maine. We were lucky enough to have you up in Maine, which was pretty cool. And we did a cool collaboration where my day job, working for Orono Brewing Company, doing a beer with Whalefall, which was pretty awesome. Big, exciting time. It was cool because I do think, and I was telling, I had Adam Caesar on an episode before yours, and we were talking a little bit about, and you and Adam did in conversation together
Mhm.
in
Right.
Pennsylvania around Whale Fall's release, and I remember because Adam had put a picture of the beer out there, and I'm like, hey, yeah, this is kind of funny. And so Adam and I have had he's been on a couple times, and we've talked back and forth and so on. And we're saying that I think I sold some books for you. And I'm not taking credit for that, but I do know for at least a handful of people, if not more, that would not have bought in Whalefall if they didn't know the beer was there. And that's only the people that I talked to.
Sure.
So it was kind of cool. And I'm not trying to like pat myself on the back or pat us on the back because obviously you're the one that approached us about it. But it's pretty badass to be able to do that because it's a different avenue, and I'm guessing it works the same way with Dark Matter Coffee. I'm guessing that they probably sold some books as well for people buying coffee that didn't know that it was a novel and didn't know who you are and so on and so forth. So, what do you have like? I'm guessing you have fun with these kind of collaborations
Oh yeah.
and doing these things. Yeah,
Yeah. I mean, it's super fun. I mean, there's so much about like promoting books that isn't fun to me that I
social
really,
media.
yeah, largely that. But there's certain kinds of
Yes.
press that isn't fun. So yeah, anytime there's something that just feels one unique or two just like something you already enjoy,
Mhm.
like I don't know really how many books, the Wellfall beer or the Living Dead coffee
Yeah.
sold. I'm sure it sold some,
Yeah. Yeah.
uh, but it's just I like coffee and I like beer, and being able to like have something to sort of hold up that isn't the book, uh, it just makes you feel. It makes me feel good, you
It,
know. Like
it,
it
it,
makes me feel like I'm stretching into other areas, which is an extension of how I'm already doing,
mhm.
adult books, youth books, graphic
Yeah.
novels, screenplays, whatever. It's just another way to stretch out, and it just I don't know. At the end of the day, it just makes me happy.
Well, I mean, I saw, and actually, I'm a person. I listen to I hybrid read, so I listen to a lot of audiobooks at the same time as not at the same time. I'm like physically reading the book and listening to it, but like I'll listen to it in the car on the way to the office, and then I get home and I'll pick up the actual novel, find out what chapter I'm on, read it. It's a little bit annoying, but that way I can actually read more. And if I'm really
Yeah.
entrenched in a book, I can keep going. I'm doing dishes. I got one earphone in, trying to do dishes. It's this mundane task. I can pay attention or whatever. But I'm not a kind of person who can sit in a bar or a coffee shop or anything like that and read. It's just too
Mhm.
much going on. I want to know what's going on. Someone will inevitably walk in the door that I know, and then I'm talking to them, having coffee or a beer with them, and so on and so forth. But there's like a handful of people that come to our brewery, both our Bangor or our Orono location, and sit at a table
Oh yeah.
on like a Wednesday night, have a beer and read their book. And they're just flipping through their novels and so on and so forth. And I'm like, first of all, props to you for doing that because I just couldn't do that. But there's only, like I mentioned, 5 or 6 people. That's it into the thousands of people that come
Mhm.
into my brewery. And so the conversation every time someone ordered a whale fall beer, it was, oh, cool, the name whale fall and the story about what whale fall was, and all that stuff became a very normal conversation in a place that typically wouldn't have it. And it's not like
Right.
even if you called us and be like, oh, we'll pay you $1,000 to put a poster up, it
Sure.
still wouldn't have that same conversation. And we've talked about this in the past in the brewery. It's like we were gonna make a beer in that tank anyway. Like it wasn't, this is not one of those things that's like, oh, we had to do something special, like special
Right.
timing and all that stuff. Yes, obviously we had to make it at a certain time, but it made sense because it's like, okay, all we have to do is work together with you, your publisher, artists that work on the covers to do this because and let's do something special with it. So we did order the special hop thing and all that stuff for it, which was really cool. But the conversation got up in a bar to
That's
have a
that's
conversation about
really
whale fall.
that's really great. I hadn't thought of it like that. The fact that suddenly your book discussions are happening in a place where book discussions don't normally happen.
Yes.
And maybe that was happening in some of the coffee shops that sold the various
Yes.
coffees that I've done.
Yeah.
That is fantastic. Like that is really kind of a dream, and there's a good reason to keep doing it. I think.
Yes. And I think that so when we had a conversation about it, we reached out. So if anybody doesn't know that story ahead of time, was Daniel, you were on a couple of years ago and we talked about your graphic novels and we talked about things like Living Dead a little bit. And you had reached out saying you have Whale Fall coming out and it would be kind of cool. We're from Maine here, and we have whales and it makes sense. You're looking for a brewery. You have this connection now with the brewery. And you've done it with Dark Matter over in Chicago. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
You're in Chicago. That you've done a collab with them. Let's do this for Whale Fall. I was like, oh, this is an amazing idea. So we talked to ownership. They thought it was a great idea. And so we did this. We did this Whale Fall beer and it came out limited batch. And we did a couple of signings and we did some fun stuff with it. And we sent them to your different stops along your trip. Some
Hmm.
of them got there, some of them didn't, but we won't talk about that. We actually did get a package back, I think, like 3 months later.
Oh, that's funny.
And it was a test to us because we're like, okay, this was in the mail because the funny thing is, I just maybe someone must have been filling it in that UPS route because they said wrong address or something was wrong about like delivery. And I'm like, you don't think that the delivery driver for UPS didn't know where this was supposed to go? So someone must have been filling in for a vacation or something like that
Yeah.
and used as an excuse not to deliver it. But the quality of the beer was still there. That was actually being
Yeah.
sent across the country, so on and so forth. We cooled it back down. We drank it. It was like, oh, cool, we got this beer back. I could drink 3 months later. But it worked so well. And we had so much fun with it that we thought I reached out to Daniel again. I was like, okay, we might not do you have a bunch more books coming out. It's not like we're going to do this yearly. Maybe we will,
Sure.
maybe we won't. But I'm just saying, hey, let's do it again. We have the time, we have the energy, we have the,
Mm-hmm.
let's just feed off of it and see what happens. And so we discussed the idea about putting Pay the Piper on a beer label, and we came out with Pay the Piper IPA, and we thought it'd be kind of fun to do it again. And I think that the artwork is phenomenal. When I saw the original art or the artwork come off the picture you posted, the cover reveal, I'm like, oh my god, this is gonna be perfect. This is gonna work so well. I love
It
it so
looks really
much.
nice on the beer. It looks great in the beer can. I've got a couple in my fridge right now.
Yeah,
And the nice thing that we haven't mentioned yet
yeah,
is the Whalefall beer was delicious.
yes.
It was also just really, really good.
I like how you said the
I'm
word delicious because you said it in your quote, we put in the PR, the press release. And
uh-huh.
I think your publicist wrote back being like, can we pick a different word for this? Because I used it, you used it, and we used it somewhere
Yeah.
else in the press. Like the word delicious in here a lot. I'm like, but it is delicious. So how come
Yeah. I guess you could say tasty. I don't know.
tasty? I think I said delightful. I think I changed mine to
Okay,
delightful.
that's good too.
But uh, but yeah, you're right. And so because it tasted so well, we just decided to do a small tweak on last year's beer.
Okay,
It's
great.
very similar, but this uses that Phantasm, which is a special thing from Yakova Chief that gives it a more softer feel. And
Mm-hmm.
when you drink this, you're gonna get remind you of Whale Fall. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
to me, I work in the beer industry. I try so many beers too that I can't say, oh, it's just like Whale Fall from last
Yeah,
year because
yeah.
I don't remember exactly what Whale Fall tasted like. But there is a similarity to it, but it's also different, which is kind of cool. Which is again, your writing is similar but
Yeah.
different in the sense that this
Yeah.
is a horror novel versus the Whale Fall. And so we were able to do that, and I think it's pretty sweet to be able to make this beer again that really matches the cover of the book because I do have the book here too, actually. The cover of
Nice.
the book it matches the. Let's see, look at that.
Nice.
There you go.
I
And
can't
I
wait.
have the people's names. Cover design by Patrick Sullivan and Igor Satanovsky. Sounds like Satanovsky. Evangeline Gallagher took the did the cover images. And I can say Shutterstock too, but that's just legality. We don't have to actually say Shutterstock.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Evangeline Gallagher
Yes.
did
Yes.
the art, the
Yes.
actual
Yes. The
art of it.
artwork itself. Yes.
And I'm a huge fan of her and always wanted her to do a cover. And then this year I got two covers by her.
It's because
I
monster
got Pay
variations.
the Piper and the reissue of Monster Variations. And I had no idea. Even after I saw the Pay the Piper cover, I didn't know she had done it until much
Yeah.
later. And then I was like, oh my God, I have two covers by her now. And didn't have any idea.
That's great. I mean, maybe you have the whole line of them. Every time you have a re-release years later, if you get another re-release of Rotters, you can do a new cover for Rotters. Um,
Yeah, I mean that would be maybe I
phenomenal.
re-release all my old books on
Yeah,
a little
like in paperback, like
Evangeline Gallagher box set or something.
yeah, they all be roughly the same size and so on and so forth. And you got a hell of a pull quote on the cover there too, with Tenerife Dews. That's
Yeah,
pretty
Tenerife is
badass. Yeah,
she's awesome.
yeah,
And also, and the reason I wanted her to read the book above all else is that she's a big Romero
yeah.
fan and has taught Romero in her college classes. And, I just thought she might respond
Hmm.
well to this book. And so that was
And yeah,
awesome to get her involved.
but yeah, so back on the beer, just really quickly before we get off of that subject, but like because we liked it so much, we wanted to do it again. I think it was an awesome idea, and I talked to you met Jabron Graham, who owns the Briar Patch here in Bangor, Maine, where we had some signing last year for Whalefall. But I said, hey, we'll do this so on and so forth. But like, we'll do. I think we're going to continue doing literary beers, but I'm like, maybe we'll start
Cool.
to open the floodgates up there a little bit and ask different people because it might be nice to have different parts of the country or different authors. Not to
Yeah.
saying that we won't do one with Daniel in the future, but it was like I think at some point people are going to go, "Why Daniel?"
Yeah.
You know what I
I
mean?
will
Like,
live there.
okay,
Yeah.
at some point the connection is going to go farther and farther away
Yeah, sure
from why
could.
we original beer was made, to the point where unless there's actual beer that's like or a book based in Maine,
Yeah,
that I was
right.
like, yeah, at some point people could be like, well, we're fans of Daniel, but that's at some point people are
No,
going to be like, oh, that's like fifth
that's
beer
fair.
later,
That's
a
fair.
fifth,
You would
a
think I
fifth
lived
beer
in
later, yeah.
Bangor.
Yeah, exactly. You're like, oh, you came up here and visited, so now forever we're gonna do beers with Dana. No, but it's coming out on August 28th, which I think is actually the day that this episode drops. So it comes out the same day. So if you're coming to the Bangor area in Maine and throughout Maine, actually, it's going to be in throughout Maine. But yeah, you can grab Pay the Piper. It'll be on draft. It'll be in cans. And yeah, I'm super excited. And I don't want to obviously you don't know for sure. Is Dark Matter going to work with you too, or is this are you
Not on
done?
this one, no.
Okay,
But yeah, I'd love to work with them again.
their coffee's
It's
phenomenal. Just straight
oh
up.
yeah, oh yeah, Dark Knight's the best. Um, yeah, it's one of those weird things where you'd say, you know, I was about to say you have to figure out which projects you want to do, which
Yeah,
things on, and you would like you might think, well, how do you decide that on a coffee? Like what
yeah.
books make sense for coffee and some don't. And yet there's a I have a gut feeling, that no, not this book. Yes, maybe this book.
Yeah.
And so I do hope to work with them again, but we'll see.
And I will say, I mean, I was reached out to, David M. Boer, comic book writer, and other people, Joseph Schmalke from here from Maine. They have reached out to me and been like, "Oh, that was really cool. You did with Daniel. Maybe one day." And it's like, so at that point, also, it's like there's only a finite schedule. We talked about the beers gonna
Sure.
be made anyway, but there's
Yeah.
other commitments that like us as a brewery, for an example, have to other things. And so I've been reached out to, and someone's like, "Can you make a wedding beer? How do I get a wedding beer made for me?" I'm like, "Work for
Sure.
the brewery and have an
Yeah.
in." They're like, yeah, that's what you. I'm like, no, no, no. You have to physically work in the brewery and have it in to get that made because it's just not on the schedule. And so we had the ability to do this and to fit in. And we had the discussion closer to Whaleful, I think, for that Whaleful beer. So it was a somewhat closer. We had this discussion 9 months ago
Right,
about
right.
doing this, and it got obviously just caught up. I'm like, oh my god, it's next week, or 2 weeks
Yeah,
from
tell
now. I
me
was like,
about
holy
it.
crap, this is right around the corner. And so that's why this did this. But I just felt like it made sense to do it one more time, at least one more time. Again, maybe in the future there's another one coming, but maybe that sell people. This might be the last one with Daniel's name on it. Hurry up and
Yes.
go grab it. This is limited quantity. But that was the other part about it I wanted to do. I wanted to, as much as it is nice to sell a bunch of beer,
Mhm.
it's also one of those things that makes it this limited size. So like our normal batches will be about 60
Sure.
barrels. This is only 8 barrels. And so like there's that, you have to go get it now. It's not going to be around forever. And I think that's part of it. I mean, obviously the book's going to be around, but there's a limited number of cans that are going to be there,
I like that
which is pretty
too.
cool. Mm.
There's a part of me that really responds to that kind of thing too, and I don't know why. Maybe it comes from growing up in the analog era where
Mhm.
things just weren't available forever.
Yeah.
Like there's part of me that wants to release a book that only has 500 copies ever made. Like there's a part of me that just finds the
Yeah.
scarcity appealing.
Yeah, it's true, and I think that's the one thing we've done that with merchandise too, with T-shirts, like at the brewery. Like, oh, let's just do a T-shirt that's like, okay, we have 72 of these, and that's the only time we're ever going to make them. And they also fly, so it's also a marketing scheme, honestly, at the same
Right.
time as it is as a positive thing, just because it's limited. But people can buy it immediately if it's only a limited number available, and that's that scarcity part of it, and so on. So that's how breweries across the country had lines out their doors for beers for a while there. A few years ago, it's because they're like, well, if I don't get it at the brewery this time, I'm never going to get it. And
Right.
so there was this like, limited edition part of it. And so it's not as extreme limited as the point where you have to line outside of our door. But it is limited to the point where, 80 cases of beer was like the max amount made. So if you buy a case, you're buying 1/80th of the beer.
Sure.
So yeah,
I
it's pretty,
mean,
it's
and
pretty,
you know comic books way better than I do, and like limited edition comic
yeah.
book covers and stuff. That's a huge thing, right?
Hmm. Hmm. So it's at that too, and I think, and so we had the cool thing you mentioned about signing and doing unusual things. We're going to be giving away on our Instagram for the brewery that's going to be probably cross promoted with the podcasting one. We're going to give away a couple of books that Union Square and company was willing to enough to give us to give away, and we're also going to include I sent them to you, so you'll have them signed, and we'll get them back, and we'll get them to people, and there's some labels in there that you'll sign, and so there's that
Yep.
label that's pretty cool too. That's not been on a beer. It's flat. It's a sticker. You stick it on something if you wanted to, but you could put it in a frame or whatever. And that's what I do for the majority of the ones that I've done with other people. I've done labels with
Right.
for the Losers Club from It, and they saw everybody that was at this event. It was minus what's his name? Who did Robot Chicken? I forget his name. Whatever. And one of them passed away, and so that obviously couldn't get that signature on there. But I've done ones for Terrifier. Um,
Right.
the movies. So I have Damien Leone and David Howard Thornton's signature on them, and your signature on yours in the office. They're flat in a thing. So sometimes that's pretty cool. I mean, a book, you sign the inside of a book, it goes on a shelf, you don't get to see it. And so there's
Right.
another thing that you get to see with this thing on it. So which is pretty cool. And it's unique in that sense. But
Yes, those are in the mail to you as we speak.
look at this. There you go. See, we're mailing things back and forth here. I got my UPS driver is amazing. Because the beer, I was like, oh, I want to get it out to you today because I was going to be there the next day, and I was like, oh, it's gonna be next week. And so I was like, it's not done yet. They're canning it right now. Can you come back in like 5 minutes. And he's like, yeah, I'll go do my run. I'll come right back. So he came right back. And the cans I sent to you are like the 7th or 8th cans off the line,
Huh,
which is pretty
nice.
cool. So they're the first cans, I would say. Actually, is there a number on the bottom of this? I don't think there is. Yeah, there's not. But yeah, so that's pretty cool. I think it's awesome to do that cross promotion thing. I think it's one of the coolest things. I think a lot of people, even the newspaper in the area, has picked up and calling it a literary beer, because it's this unique way of promoting something. It's you're one of the few, I would think. I'm sure there
Right.
are other people who have done literary beers or comic book beers or movie beers, but like I don't know if it's an homage to the movie or the book or
Hmm.
an afterthought. This is more of a like this is coming out actually before the book, a week before the book.
Right. Right. Yeah. It's really cool. I really like
I think
it.
it's awesome. I have a whale foot one here. I think too.
Ah, there it is. Yeah, I've got one of those. I kept one
Yeah.
can that I will save for some sort of special occasion.
Yeah, it's a fun thing, and I think as a designer for cans, I always want to use my own artwork, but when I get to use someone else's artwork, also, this is might be a cool thing. I don't know if Evangeline has ever had her artwork on beer cans, but that's a
Uh,
pretty cool
uh,
thing too. And
yeah,
so,
probably not.
and actually, we'll actually communicate with that too, because if they are interested in beer, I'd love to be able to get them some of the cans as well. As I've also reached out to your publicists, asked if they wanted
Okay.
any too, but they never responded. But we'll
All right.
we'll
We'll
get to
just
that later.
let me know.
Yeah, we'll ping on that too.
We'll
I just
figure
didn't
it
know if
out.
they wanted to try. We didn't do it the last time, but I wanted to see if anybody wanted it this time. But yeah, Pay the Piper comes out September 3rd at your bookstores everywhere. Pre-ordering it is worth it, in my opinion. People, it's good. I like bookshop.org if anybody wants to do that because that helps local bookstores on there, as well as will there be an audiobook? Do you know?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
There should be an audiobook. I don't I don't know if it's coming out exactly when the book comes out, but it should be close.
Okay. I'm excited to see that too. I think the next time I'll read it, I'll actually listen to it because I think I'm excited to see how that goes. Because again, with the book having a nice Cajun dialect and all that stuff, it'd be
Yeah,
kind of
yeah,
cool to
yeah.
listen to it
Yeah,
as well as reading it.
we've got a good reader who can do the Cajun well.
That's what you want. You don't want him to do it bad, do you, Dan?
No.
That would be a very bad thing to have the bad accent being read. But you also got um, Whalefall paperback coming out on September 10th. And you have 3 more books announced, right? Or is it 2 of them are announced and one of them is the name hasn't been announced, but you have a 2 book deal with Saga Press. So I guess
Essentially two book deals.
yeah,
And
okay.
we know the first book of both of those
Okay.
2 book deals. So
Okay.
the first 2 book deal starts off with Angel Down,
Yeah.
sort of a World War One book. Some soldiers shoot down an angel. And then the first book of the Saga Press contract is called The Sixth Nick, and it's my first real sci-fi book.
Mhm.
So I'm very, very excited about Angel Down and Sixth Nick. They're 2 of my favorite things I've ever done, and they couldn't be more different. Um, just, just both of them are radically unlike anything I've ever
Mhm.
done, and of course that just makes me love them all the more.
More exactly. Well, and then that's one of the things that Adam and I talked about. People can go back and listen to that episode, but like it reinvigorates you too. I think
Yeah,
one of the things that like there's different people. Adam's now releasing actually tomorrow as we're recording this is Clown in the Cornfield 3, and then you have mostly books that are unlike your some of your collaboration books have been or
sure,
co-authored
sure.
books have been as sequels, but for the most part you write a book and then you're done with that book
Mhm.
and you move on to the next thing, and so it reinvigorates you. I think it's fresh eyes, it's fresh stories, it's doing all that stuff. And even in your comic books, you've done Autumnal, Trojan, Cemetery. Like you haven't done the next, like it's not like Autumnal
No,
Volume 2. And
right.
so not that you wouldn't, I'm just saying that it's nice to have that different, and they are different. The Autumnal is definitely different than Trojan and so on and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I love that. I like, I'm a big fan of Daniel's writing. And that means I can read a bunch of different genres. That's pretty cool. I just want your
Well,
romance novel.
hey, just hang in there. Some people would say Shape of Water is the romance novel.
Okay, yeah, you're right. You're right. It's more of a I don't know if my wife would read that kind of a romance novel. That's not your kind of romance novel that a lot of the romance fans are looking for. But
I'll put it this way: like there's a romance novel I want to do.
yeah,
Like I've I've got several other genre projects that are in my head ready to roll.
move over, Colleen Hoover. Here comes
That's
Daniel
right.
Kraus. Right,
That's
get out of
right.
the way. But yeah, so you have a lot of stuff you're working on and coming out with. It's just pretty exciting to see. I mean, when you were doing Whale Falls promotion, you really were doing Whale Fall promotion. You had your like Trojan trade paperback and things like that.
Mhm.
Cemeterians, those were all in the works and being put into trades, and single issues are coming out and so on and so forth. But like the last time we talked like this, it wasn't Whale Fall paperback, Pay the Piper coming out, and then 2 more books announced. That's pretty cool. You're a very busy
Yeah.
person.
Yes, it is a busy time, but it's a good time because I'm
Yes.
working with amazing editors who are really understanding what I'm doing and letting me do it, which is just the dream.
Mm-hmm. That's pretty awesome. And you have an adaptation of Whalefall being worked on behind the scenes too,
Yeah,
which is
yeah,
pretty
yeah,
cool.
yeah.
I know those take time and energy. I actually just talked to Jay Bon and Singa, who has the Killers game coming out in theaters, and he had that adapt or purchased the first time was in 1995.
Wow,
Was the first time that movie was adapted or being adapted into a film. It took 30 years to get onto the screen.
that's madness.
He
Well,
goes, the
hopefully,
benefit of it, and you know this, the benefit of it was that but every couple of years it was reoptioned. So he got these random checks that he would get in the mail that his agent
yep,
would be like, oh, by the way, you have a check here sitting here because your movie got optioned again.
yeah, that's exactly right. Well,
It's like free money.
hopefully, Wellfall won't take that long.
Yeah,
The
exactly.
script, the script
Yeah,
is done. We're moving on.
there you go. That's awesome. But yeah, so Pay the Piper with George A. Romero, the final, hopefully, co-author book from the two of you, which is pretty awesome. I do think it's a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful book that people should read if you're into, Bayou horror, folk horror. You
Full
wrote a
horror,
folk
yeah.
horror book, and it's phenomenal. It comes out September 3rd at bookstores everywhere. You can pre-order it now, or just make sure you let your bookstore know that you want it. But I also highly recommend Whale Fall, which is great. So buy both of them at the same time. Technically, we pre-order one and pre-order the other, and grab them both if you haven't read it. And then if you're in Maine, grab this. If you're over in the border in New Hampshire or in Massachusetts or anywhere in New England, drive to Maine to get it. There you go. Right. I wish we had
Exactly.
distribution in Chicago or Illinois. We would have sent some out, but we don't have distribution out there. So
Uh,
maybe next time we do a beer together, there'll be distribution.
yes, we must make it happen.
But yeah, Daniel, I really appreciate you taking the time and coming back on the podcast to chat your books and so on, and the beer collaborations and more. I know you're a busy person, and taking time out is always we're always thankful for that.
Hey, man, anytime, anytime.
Absolutely. So so get back, and I'm looking forward to it. You're doing something in your hometown for the release of the book.
Yeah,
Sorry.
there's a lot of events. So
Okay.
if people want to keep up with them, they can go to my website, danielkraus.com, and click on news, and
Mhm.
that'll have the full tour.
Okay, cool. Awesome. That's just exactly what I wanted to talk about quickly, because I think going to see an author and stuff in person, getting a signature, getting to hear about the book from the mouth of the horse, if I should say it that way, is a great thing. So
Yep.
I'm
And
looking
at
forward
those
to people.
events, we will be drinking Pay the Piper beer whenever
There you go.
possible.
Exactly. We gotta work on that for sure. But yeah, I appreciate it. We'll get you back on at some point. I mean, obviously we make this, if you're gonna come up with a good book every year, we're gonna have to make this a yearly thing. So
I know.
if not before, we'll see you in a year.
Sounds perfect.
Thanks, Daniel.